Hey everyone! In this video, I want to talk again about quoting, summarizing, and paraphrasing. And so by the end of this video, the goal is really, again, to understand the differences between those things, but more importantly is to know when to use each one and why you're using each one. So let's go ahead and just jump on into it. So again, just to quickly summarize, a summary is using your own words to express the ideas of others. And remember, this one's really about scale. It's about taking a lot of content and sort of condensing it. Paraphrasing is using your own words to express the ideas of others at the same level of detail. So again, it's about turning like a sentence into a sentence, a paragraph into a paragraph, that sort of stuff. As compared to a summary, which is usually more like taking an entire chapter and turning it into a paragraph, or taking a paragraph and turning it into a sentence. Summaries are really about condensing. Paraphrasing is really about keeping it at the same length. And then you have quoting, which is again is using an exact reproduction of spoken or written words as evidence. The words themselves are evidence. You quote when the words themselves are evidence. So we'll just go into this really quickly, take some notes, just so you have a sense of making sure that you're using these at the proper time. So again, when do we summarize and why? When we want to focus on the main ideas that support a claim rather than all of the nitty-gritty little specifics. So again, this is really like, I want the big ideas, not the little ideas. Or if those ideas are really complex, they're kind of hard to understand, it doesn't make sense to quote them. It makes sense to try to simplify them, not change the idea, but to make sure that the details that are hard to understand aren't there anymore or have been simplified. The other reason we might want to do it is just to maintain our own words and sentence structure. One thing I always like to ask everyone is like, whose essay am I reading? Yours. So whose words do I mostly want to hear? Yours. So again, the goal for summary is just to take those ideas and keep your own voice. Also, the other thing is, which is mostly why you do it, is just to keep it short. You will almost always probably be able to summarize something much quicker and faster, so that is your goal. And you always want to make sure that you're citing your sources as you do this. Just don't forget. People often summarize and they don't think that they need to attribute it to who they are, but in research papers, any idea that you get from someone else, you need to cite them. So let's look at an example. If this is the topic sentence, Gen Z's reading choices, especially for fiction, are influenced as much by gender as social media. And then the next sentence is this. You have this massively long quote. There's a solid chance that you're not going to read it. I mean, you can pause and read it now if you want, but think about how distracting this would be if you got this, then this little amount, and then you just quoted all of this. Is all of this relevant? No, not really. I mean, kind of, but no, this is too much. So how could we try to capture all of these ideas in less amount of space? Well, we would summarize, and I've made videos before about how to summarize. Go back and watch that. I'll link it at the end of this video. But the goal here is to find out, what is this paragraph about? What is it emphasizing? So I might have something like this. As librarian Christina Vircholetto, there you go, I got it. 2018 survey suggests the biggest difference in Gen Z respondents, that's what this is about, was between the different genres of fiction preferred by men and women. Hey, there's one sentence. This idea is complicated. Let's break it into two. However, even here, fantasy and mystery and suspense are the top three for both categories. However, women typically prefer romance over men's sci-fi. And then I set my page. Oops. I could also do this. Perhaps the most interesting difference the survey found was how much more popular poetry was among Gen Z compared to older generations. Vircholetto attributes this to the rise of Insta-poets, or poets who share their work through social media rather than traditional poetry or publishing venues. Page 28. So again, you can even see how I've captured different things here for different sorts of purposes. So again, rather than having this as just one big citation where I force the reader to figure it all out, I can break this down. I have two pieces of evidence now as opposed to one that's hard to understand. How much better? We love it. And again, a summary can be multiple sentences. It's cool. When and why do we paraphrase? Well, when we want to focus on main ideas that support our claim, we don't need all of those little details. We also only want to highlight and retain keywords and phrases. Usually just a few words, what you might call a snippet, maybe 3, 4, 5 words that illustrate your point, and the rest of it is all in your words. Or when you want to keep the tone of the original, you sort of want to show how they were trying to talk in theirs. And then finally, The goal for this is really just like the other one, to keep your own style, to put it in your own words, to maintain your own sort of structure and sound. But again, you want to make sure you cite it so you're not plagiarizing it. Okay, let's look at an example. So if this is my topic sentence, due to increased social media use, Gen Z prioritizes online recommendations, often in gendered ways. Hey, it's the exact same thing, basically. Again, you see here, if I just blop all of this down, you're like, that's a lot. I don't want to read it. What do I focus on? I'm not sure. What? It's so much that you're overwhelming your reader. You're cognitively overloading us, so we're just sort of piecing out. So again, we'd want to read through here. We'd want to ask, what is this about? What are they emphasizing? What do I want to emphasize from this? So we would just do something like this. Again, while still valuing input from real-life social groups, Gen Z relies more heavily on online platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, but these sites vary by gender. So see, look, I'm just snibbiting in part of it because men were, and again, I'm just using a small little quote, much less likely to use Pinterest than women. Hey, cool. And again, I cite my source to show you that this isn't necessarily my idea. I'm getting it from someone else, just enhancing my own credibility. You can see here how I'm just truncating these ideas. Make sense? Again, I'm keeping the same level of detail because I'm using some of their quotes. Okay, when do we quote? This is a little bit easier. You want to make sure you do understand this. But this is easy when the words themselves are evidence from a primary source. So there's really two things we want to emphasize here. The words are evidence. You're going to sit there and you're going to analyze them. You're going to explain them to me. You're going to break them down and tell me how the specific words on the page are evidence. And usually, almost always, we're going to quote from a primary source. You can sometimes quote from a secondary source, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but primary sources are what we primarily want to quote from. But if you have a secondary source from a really, really credible author that everyone knows and it backs up your claim really, really well, you might want to quote that. But this is something you want to do sparingly and only for your main interlocutors. Or if the words are really, really, really good, just strikingly original, or just show this in such a way that you couldn't possibly say it any better or any differently. And that you're probably going to have, as we point out here, an extended discussion about. If you just quote and you don't have an extended discussion, it's kind of a wasted quote. Why? Why did you quote this? Why are you just making me read it? What am I supposed to focus on? Why? What do you think? Again, I'm reading your paper, so I want to know what you think. Anytime you quote, you're probably going to need to talk about it in some form. Why? Because the words themselves are evidence. And just a quick reminder, summarizing and paraphrasing are going to be about 75% or more of your overall evidence for a research paper. Again, in research papers, the goal here is really to summarize, paraphrase, and synthesize these sources, not to just give me quote, 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 quote. You only want to quote when the words themselves are evidence from a primary source, or you're going to have an extended discussion on it. So let's just review really quickly. Summaries are the most generalized and broad in scope. They're entirely in your own words. They're really about condensing. Paraphrasing is more specific in detail. You can use small pieces of the quote if you want, but it's primarily your own words. But again, it's about keeping that same level of detail. Quotes are the most specific and should be used only to enhance your credibility or when the words themselves are evidence. And then finally, most of your evidence will be summarized and paraphrased. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at kbolt@elgin.edu. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.